In the late 1970s, a disturbing pattern began to emerge along the freeways of Southern California. Bodies of young men and teenage boys were being discovered in ditches, alongside off-ramps, and in remote areas adjacent to major highways. The victims had been sexually assaulted, tortured, and brutally murdered. As the body count rose, investigators realized they were dealing with a predator who used the sprawling freeway system as both hunting ground and dumping site. The killer became known as the Freeway Killer, though that moniker would eventually apply to 3 separate murderers operating independently in the same region during the same period. The most prolific and sadistic of these was William George Bonin, a man whose horrific crimes would ultimately claim the lives of at least 21 young victims between 1979 and 1980. William Bonin was born on January 8, 1947, in Willimantic, Connecticut, the second of 3 sons in a deeply dysfunctional family. His father was an abusive gambling addict, and his mother was an alcoholic who worked as a prostitute. Bonin and his brothers were frequently left in the care of their grandfather, who subjected them to severe physical and sexual abuse. When Bonin was 8 years old, he and his brothers were placed in a Connecticut children's home due to parental neglect. There, the abuse continued at the hands of older residents and staff. These early experiences of sexual victimization would profoundly shape Bonin's psychological development and later criminal behavior. As a child, Bonin was described as isolated, performing poorly in school, and exhibiting early signs of antisocial behavior. He wet the bed well into his teenage years and was known to steal from neighbors and classmates. In 1965, at age 18, Bonin enlisted in the United States Air Force and served as an aerial gunner during the Vietnam War. He completed 2 tours of duty and was awarded a Good Conduct Medal, suggesting he could function within structured military environments. However, upon his return to civilian life, his behavior rapidly deteriorated. In 1968, Bonin was arrested for sexually assaulting 5 teenage boys at gunpoint in his hometown. He was convicted and sentenced to a psychiatric facility, but was released after serving just over a year. In 1975, he was arrested again for kidnapping and sexually assaulting 4 more boys. This time he was sentenced to prison but was paroled in 1978 after serving only 4 years of a possible 15-year sentence. Psychological evaluations conducted during his incarcerations noted his sadistic sexual fantasies, lack of empathy, and high risk for reoffending, but the parole board released him nonetheless. Within months of his release, Bonin began killing. Between 1979 and 1980, William Bonin embarked on a murder spree that terrorized Southern California. He typically prowled the streets of Los Angeles and Orange counties late at night, driving a customized van equipped with a bed in the back. He targeted vulnerable young men and teenage boys, many of whom were runaways, hitchhikers, or hustlers on the streets of Hollywood and other urban areas. Bonin would offer them rides, drugs, or money for sex. Once inside his van, he would overpower them, often with the help of accomplices. His victims were subjected to brutal sexual assaults and torture involving ligature strangulation, stabbing, beating, and in some cases, mutilation. After murdering them, Bonin would dispose of their bodies along Southern California's extensive freeway system, particularly the Interstate 5, Interstate 605, and Highway 101 corridors. What made Bonin particularly dangerous and difficult to catch was his use of accomplices. Over the course of his killing spree, he recruited at least 4 young men to assist him in his crimes. These accomplices included Vernon Butts, Gregory Miley, James Monroe, and William Pooh. Some participated actively in the assaults and murders, while others served as lookouts or helped dispose of bodies. This network of accomplices not only facilitated Bonin's crimes, but also complicated the investigation, as multiple witnesses would eventually provide conflicting accounts and varying degrees of involvement. The accomplices were typically younger men whom Bonin had befriended or manipulated, often through offers of drugs, money, or a sense of belonging. The investigation into the Freeway Killer murders involved multiple law enforcement agencies across several counties. The jurisdictional complexities and sheer geographic spread of the crime scenes initially hampered coordination. However, as the body count rose and public pressure mounted, authorities formed a task force to share information and resources. Investigators began to notice patterns in the victims' young males, evidence of sexual assault, similar methods of strangulation and stabbing, and bodies dumped near freeways. Witness reports from friends and family members of missing boys helped establish timelines and last-known locations. Several witnesses reported seeing victims getting into a customized van driven by a man matching Bonin's description. The breakthrough came in June 1980 when William Pooh, one of Bonin's accomplices, went to police and confessed his involvement in one of the murders. Pooh had been wrestling with guilt and fear, and his testimony provided investigators with critical details about Bonin's methods, his van, and his identity. Shortly after Pooh's confession, police placed Bonin under surveillance. On June 11, 1980, officers observed Bonin driving with a young man in his van in the early morning hours. When they pulled him over, they found the young man bound and gagged in the back. Bonin was arrested on the spot, and the intended victim was rescued before he could be killed. A search of Bonin's van revealed physical evidence linking him to multiple murders, including fibers, hair and bloodstains matching several victims. Following his arrest, Bonin's accomplices were also taken into custody. Vernon Butts, Gregory Miley, James Monroe, and William Pooh all faced charges, with varying degrees of cooperation with prosecutors. Butts, who was believed to have participated in at least 6 murders, committed suicide in his jail cell in 1981 before trial. The others testified against Bonin in exchange for reduced sentences, providing detailed accounts of the abductions, assaults, and murders. Their testimonies, combined with physical evidence and witness statements, formed the foundation of the prosecution's case. William Bonin's trial began in November 1981 in Los Angeles County Superior Court. He was charged with 12 counts of murder, along with robbery, sodomy, and other offenses. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, including forensic links, eyewitness testimony, and confessions from accomplices. Bonin showed little emotion throughout the proceedings, occasionally smirking or making inappropriate comments. The defense attempted to argue diminished capacity due to his history of childhood abuse and claimed that the accomplices were more culpable than Bonin himself. The jury was unconvinced. On January 5, 1982, Bonin was convicted on 10 counts of murder and numerous other charges. During the penalty phase, the jury recommended death. He was formally sentenced to death on March 12, 1982. In a separate trial in Orange County in 1983, Bonin was convicted of 4 additional murders and received another death sentence. William Bonin spent 14 years on death row at San Quentin State Prison. He granted several interviews to journalists and researchers, often speaking about his crimes with disturbing detachment and even nostalgia. He expressed no genuine remorse, instead blaming his victims for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. On February 23, 1996, at age 49, William Bonin became the first person executed by lethal injection in the history of California. His final words were reportedly, "I would suggest that when a person has a thought of doing anything serious against the law, that before they did that they should go to a quiet place and think about it seriously." The William Bonin case had a lasting impact on criminal justice practices in California and beyond. It highlighted the dangers of prematurely releasing violent sex offenders despite clear psychiatric warnings about their likelihood to reoffend. The case also demonstrated the critical importance of interagency cooperation in tracking serial offenders who operate across jurisdictional boundaries. The formation of task forces dedicated to linking similar crimes across regions became standard practice. Additionally, the Bonin case brought attention to the vulnerability of marginalized youth runaways, homeless teenagers, and young male sex workers who often fell through the cracks of social services and were targeted by predators. The dynamics of accomplice involvement in serial murder also became a subject of intense study, revealing how charismatic and manipulative offenders could recruit others into participating in their crimes, either through coercion, promises of rewards, or shared deviance. Decades after his execution, the Freeway Killer case serves as a grim reminder of how systemic failures in the criminal justice and mental health systems can have deadly consequences, and how the careful, coordinated work of law enforcement, combined with the courage of witnesses willing to come forward, remains essential in bringing such predators to justice.